Now, I'm pretty sure you will have heard of the Bulova Accutron, and I'm talking about the watch Bulova made in the 70s, but do you know how they actually work? And did you know you can pick up a tuning fork watch, also known as a Hummer, for AliExpress money? If you stick around, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about Hummers and how you can pick one up on a budget, but I'm going to start with just a quick history lesson. It's just a quick one. Get yourselves comfortable, grab a tea and coffee. I'll crack on. At some point in the late 60s, maybe even the very early 70s, Bulova hired Max Hetzel, who was an electronic engineer, and they tasked him with the job of producing a watch that didn't need a balance spring. And he did exactly that. He produced the first ever watch that had no need for a balance spring. In its place was a tuning fork. And these tuning fork watches were made between 1971 and 1977, of course. It was the quartz crisis that saw the end of Hummers. Now, despite these watches only being made for a few years in the 70s, they have become incredibly popular. They've almost got a cult following. It was Mike from My Retro Watches that got me onto these, and in the last few weeks, I've become a little bit obsessed with them. I've bought a couple. I'll show you those in a minute. Now, these work in a surprisingly simple way, and they came about with the advent of the transistor, which is an electronic switch. Transistors just transformed electronics in the 70s, and they had a huge influence on the watch industry. And what Max discovered was he could get a tuning fork to vibrate 360 times a second, very, very consistently, using a transistor, a capacitor, and a resistor. Max then found a way to use those 360 vibrations a second to power an index cog, and from that he could essentially use the standard watch cogs and mechanism to power a watch. Now, I've managed to take some macro footage of a couple of Hummer watches I've got, which demonstrates how these watches work. And like I said, it's surprisingly straightforward. The oscillating index cog is tiny, and that in itself is a marvel. There's 360 sort of saw teeth on that cog. Even under macro, you can't see them. But the fact that they're in a sort of sawtooth configuration is really, really important, because what that does is that ensures that cog only spins in one direction. Max then connected an index arm to the tuning fork, which pushed against the index cog. There was also a second index arm which was stationary. That wasn't connected to the tuning fork, and that prevented the cog from turning backwards. So you had one index arm pulsing in and out 360 times a second, and the other one stayed stationary and basically locked the index cog into place every time it was moved around by the pulsating index arm. Straightforward, right? Now, by doing this, Max created a watch that was able to achieve plus minus 2 seconds a day. That's 60 seconds a month. These were considered very, very accurate watches. And did you also know, probably the most famous Bulova Accutron, the Space View watch, was actually a demo watch. These were sent to authorized dealers to show customers how these watches worked, but the customers just wanted those ones. They didn't want the normal looking watches with Accutron movements in them, so Bulova decided to put the demo watches into full production. Now, sadly, I don't own a Bulova Accutron, so you're probably wondering, why are you making a video on a watch that you don't own? Well, in 1971, Citizen approached Bulova and said, we'd like to use these movements in watches for the Japanese domestic market. Can we make them under license? And Bulova said, yeah, sure. So there are Accutron watches out there, proper Bulova Accutron movement watches, made by Citizen, that cost a fraction of the price of an old 70s Bulova Accutron, and I've bought 2 of them. I'm going to show them to you now. So here are my 2 recent purchases. The watch on the left is a Hisonic, and it has a licensed Bulova Accutron movement inside it. The watch on the right is a GX Cosmotron, a very similar movement, not the same, but just very, very similar. And ironically, the one thing that I haven't mentioned up to now is the real reason why these watches, or watches with these types of movements inside them, have just become so popular. And it is that ultra smooth sweep of the second hand. So you've got automatic watches where the second hand will essentially pulse or tick 6 times a second, maybe 8 times a second, occasionally 10 times a second, and very rarely 12 times a second. Then you've got a Bulova Precisionist where the second hand essentially pulses 16 times a second. Well, the tuning fork inside these watches is pulsating at an incredible rate. And that second hand on some of these watches is essentially pulsing 360 times a second, comparable to a spring drive watch by Grand Seiko. And I've bought my Grand Seiko spring drive watch out so we can see them side by side. And really, it's the ultra smooth sweep of that second hand that ultimately makes these watches so desirable. You can just imagine what people felt back in the 70s when they were met with watches like this, where the second hand just didn't seem to tick or pulse at all. It just swept beautifully smoothly. I suspect some people thought it was just watch wizardry, but no, now you know exactly why that second hand sweeps so smoothly. Incredible. But before you rush out and fill your watch box full of Bulova Accutrons and Citizen Hisonic watches, there is something else you need to know. At the start of the video, I referred to these as hummers, and there's a very good reason for that. The tuning fork hums, and it's audible. It's not loud, but it's audible. I had these two watches in my lounge for maybe 2 or 3 hours, and then that was it. I had to take them upstairs and basically put them in a cupboard. You wouldn't want to sleep next to one of these on your dresser. So yeah, incredible technology for the time, but gosh, quite annoying as well. So if you are thinking of picking up one of these, maybe just get 1 or 2 at the absolute most. I really don't think you or anybody else that lives in your house with you would want you to own any more of these. But anyway, incredible watches. Yeah, love them. Absolutely love them. Fascinating technology. Really cool history to these watches. And if you are interested in picking up a tuning fork watch, on a budget, I can totally recommend Citizen Hisonic or GX Cosmotron watches. If you go onto eBay or maybe even Chrono24, I've just checked actually, and there is one on there at the moment. £200, maybe £250 will pick you up a watch like this. These have basically cost me around £200 to bring into the country, and they're in pretty good condition actually. This one on the right, although it's not a Hisonic, it's probably a slightly less desirable version. Came with its hang tag and its instruction booklet, and actually that was very useful because adjusting the day and date on this watch is not that straightforward. It's actually quite finicky and, well, fussy. So yeah, I might produce a video showing people how to do that because I've run out of time. I've been waffling on about these watches for far too long now, and I'm sure you're getting bored. But anyway, yeah, if you've got any questions, let me know in the comments section, and I'll do my best to answer any questions. Right, guys? Thanks for watching, and yeah, you'll see me again very, very soon.